In this tutorial, I'll look at how to add depth of field in Nuke using the ZBlur filter. Right now I've got a basic flow with a beauty pass and ambient occlusion pass multiplied over and blended back about 75% or so. Now I'm ready to bring in one more pass. I'll press R to read and I'll go into my depth directory. What I've done here is to render out Z-depth in IFFs and then split it out using F-check to make a target sequence where the Z-depth was recorded as an RGB channel. I'll click Open, and there's my Z-depth pass. When I show it by pressing 1, we can see that white is close and black is far, and so I get mostly gray in here. We can always push the color around if we need to color correct the Z-depth to increase the depth of field. Alternately, this is a place to use the depth remapped pass in Maya. However, I'm going to use the luminance here to drive my ZBlur. Now what I'll do is copy this onto the result of the merge. With my Z channel selected, I'll press K for copy. And as usual, it's an A over B. I'll make the B channel the merge. So now I've got an A over B, copying by default alpha to alpha. What I'll do though is change over the copy channel to RGBA red, taking the first channel, as they're all the same gray, and copying it over to depth.z. Now, when I click in the viewer and drop down in the channels I'm showing and show depth, I'll get my Z-depth in here, laid over in red. Now I'm ready for my ZBlur. With the copy selected, I'll right-click and choose Filter and ZBlur. There's a ZBlur node, and in here in the ZBlur, we have a couple of key things to affect where that depth of field sits. First, there's the focal plane. What is in focus? Depth of field gives us the thickness of the focal plane. As the tooltip says, the theoretical depth of field would be set to 0. One plane is in focus. But in practice, we usually bring this up a bit. Then there's the size, how much blur is applied. And as that blurs, there's a maximum, so it stops blurring at a certain point. What I can do to set this up is check Focal Plane Setup, and I'll pull this focal plane forward and backward until it puts in focus in green the area I want in focus. I'll pull this up a little bit, maybe down into the 0.7 range, and see what it looks like. It looks like I can go the other way. Here's 0.5 for example, or even 0.3. We can see it's pushing back that focal plane, and by pulling this forward and backward I can get that depth of field to sit where I want. There it is. As I get way down here to, here's 0.05 for example, my focal plane sits right on the ottoman. Now when I crank up the size and pull down the maximum, I can put that depth of field where I want it. I'll turn off focal plane setup, and there's a rich subtle depth of field, where the foreground mesh for example is slightly out of focus and the background is slightly defocused. We can see here in the mesh in the black that it's a little blurred. But the ottoman is in focus, and I've added on depth of field that I can key if I need. I'm ready to write this out, or put on other post effects like glow for example, and really make this a polished sequence. Remember, take Z-depth out of Maya in IFFs and then extract it in F-check, bringing it in as luminance or using the red channel for example, and copying that over to the result of whatever other blending or multiplying you have. Then put the depth of field on once all of your layers are together, so that you're affecting all of them with the same depth of field.